with the late William William uh, uh, Bill Cooper. William Bill Cooper. I wrote that article in 2015 when I was in Rio Rancho, and it was about how I got to know this amazing personality called William Cooper. And the only thing was that I wrote some criticisms about William Cooper. But at the same time, I defended him in some ways. So it was a balanced article because in 2001, I attended the funeral of the late William Bill Cooper, the author of Behold the Pale Horse, which is still today one of the most popular books in America, especially among, believe it or not, especially among the prison population. Yeah, it's one of the most popular books in America. But I attended his funeral in 2001 in Arizona, along with my friend who was Anthony J. Hilder, who used to be a talk show host, and another talk show host came, and there were only about 80 people in that funeral. And I gave, there were about 8 persons who gave a eulogy to William Cooper, who was in the casket, closed casket, right next to us. So that was 2001. I said that William Cooper was a strange fellow, but in some way he was likable. But in other ways, he was not likable at all. In fact, a lot of people accused him of being a drunkard, and that was true. And so I, uh, I talked about him in this lengthy article. So if you go to the internet, all you have to do is look at my article entitled My Association with the Late William Bill Cooper, author of Behold the Pale Horse. And as soon as I wrote that lengthy article, people started calling me a disinformation agent, especially in the UFO community. So I live with it. I live with it. Now, one thing I like to tell you, and this I'm going to introduce this one of the greatest and important personalities in the world of ufology today. And uh, what happened was, until just a few months ago, I was not a friend of Richard Doty because many years ago, 6, 7, 8 years ago, I wrote a very derogatory, terrible article about who Richard C. Doty was. And that article was entitled Richard C. Doty, Self Claimed Government Disinformation Agent Who Destroyed the Life of Albuquerque Businessman Paul Benowitz. I wrote that article. And of course, Richard Doty would have nothing to do with me. That I'm sure he knows. And so, just about a couple of months ago, I started thinking that perhaps I shouldn't have written that derogatory article about Richard C. Doty because I began to realize that it's important to present both sides of all stories. And this includes ufologists as well. People only read or listen to one side of the story of a UFO personality and disregard the other side. The other side is just as important, and there's always a reason why people had to do what they had to do. There's always a reason. And a lot of people do not understand that reason. By the way, before I introduce this great personality, the first time I heard and saw Richard Doty was when I was living in Los Angeles. I was working as a licensed funeral director in Los Angeles in 1990. And one day, and I was into UFOs that time. So I went to a Japanese video store in Los Angeles, and there was this 2 hour VHS video that was taken from a 2 hour Japanese television program about Area 51 and Doty, New Mexico. That was in 1990 when many people haven't even heard about Area 51, much less Doty. So I was watching this videotape produced by uh, a friend of mine, Nippon TV, produced by Junichi Yaoi. Very nice guy. Junichi Yaoi uh, took a Japanese TV crew to Kirtland Air Force Base in, I believe it was in 1990. I'm not sure if it was 1988, but I think it was in 1990. And the reason is William L. Moore, or Bill Moore, who I knew many years ago because I went to his office many times in Los Angeles. And William L. Moore is the world famous author of explosive book that was unprecedented at that time, and it was called The Incident at Roswell. Until William Moore and Charles Burlett's book came out, most people in America forgot about Roswell because, as you know, the subject of Roswell disappeared 1 or 2 years later after 1947 because of the famous statement that was, in the newspaper saying that it was a mistake. And so most people forgot about it. They didn't talk about it until 1980 when William Moore decided to revive the story of Roswell. And he began to interview people in the Roswell area. And he also got cooperation with Stanton Freeman. So both Stanton Freeman and William L. Moore and others visited Roswell and started looking for any people who might have witnessed the so-called Roswell incident in 1947. And lo and behold, after more than 30 years after Roswell, people came out of the woodworks because many of those people who never talked about Roswell or their experiences suddenly started to appear because they wanted their names in the limelight and they wanted to be part of that book. Okay? So to me, the Incident at Roswell book is a very significant book, and it changed everything. And that came out in 1980, the very same year that William Moore visited Kirtland Air Force Base. And if I'm not mistaken, he met Richard Doty at Kirtland Air Force Base. Now, here's the thing, and then I will introduce him. Here's the thing. The William Moore admitted in 1989 that he was an asset of the CIA. In a speech in Nevada, MUFON conference in Nevada in 1989, William Moore declared that he was a misinformant or disinformation person, and he did this and that became one of the nightmares for the organizer of the MUFON conference. There were two MUFON conferences that year, at that same time. One MUFON conference was the regular MUFON conference, and the other MUFON conference was the dissident MUFON conference led by John Lear. Because John Lear didn't want anything to do with the same old stuff about ufology, same old stuff. But John Lear decided it's about time that some explosive information should be shared in MUFON. So John Lear invited people like Bill Cooper and Bill English and, you know, many others. And but anyway, what happened in 1989, that's history. Bill Moore admitted he was a disinformation agent. And the book, Roswell Incident, was an excellent book, but it was filled with lots and lots of misinformation. Misinformation. And so you hear about this person who claimed that he was working in a funeral home in Roswell in 1947, and he got a telephone call from the U.S. Air Force Base that they were looking for baby caskets. And he started telling all these stories. And other folks in Roswell who wanted to become part of the Roswell legend started appearing out of the woodworks because they wanted their names. That's how it is. But, today, as I told you already, we have this wonderful personality called the Richard C. Doty, who I now call Rick Doty because it's more friendlier. And I think he likes the Rick Doty. But anyway, because after he read my derogatory article, I apologized to him a few months ago. I told Richard, I'm so sorry, Richard. All these years I've written a derogatory article about you, and please forgive me. I'm going to delete all the articles, negative articles that I ever wrote about Richard C. Doty, such as the article about Richard C. Doty, uh, affected the life of Albuquerque businessman Paul Benowitz. There's a lengthy article which I believe was not really correct because I found out that he had his own side of his story and he had the right to tell his side of the story. And that's how it is. That's how it should be in the so-called UFO community. And that's how the UFO community will advance if people accept openness and accept why certain people did certain things and to what benefit. You know, right before I introduce him, he made a amazing 2-hour video interview, continuous interview with Stephen Greer in 2018, I think. Stephen Greer, I believe he came to Albuquerque and did an amazing interview in which Rick Doty started speaking nonstop for 2 hours, nonstop, and it was one of the most amazing interviews I ever seen in my life. And I understood why he had to do things. By the way, there's no such a title in the U.S. military as a disinformation agent. There's no such an animal like a disinformation agent. There's no such a title in the military called officially disinformation agent. There's no such a title. You are either an intelligence officer or a counterintelligence officer. And a counterintelligence officer many times have to use misinformation to send a message for many purposes. And many of the purpose was for the defense of this important facility called Kirtland Air Force Base. And, that's how it is, folks. I tell you, Kirtland Air Force Base is one of the most important military Air Force bases in the world, if not in the world. There are other important places like Area 51 in Nevada, Edwards Air Force Base in California, but Kirtland is very special because it started in 1947. There was no Kirtland Air Force Base until 1947, the very same year that CIA was established. 1947, the very same year that the National Security Agency was established. 1947 was the year in which I think I just said it, but the Air Force Department started, and then CIA started. You know, a lot of things, strangely enough, started in 1947, the year of the so-called Roswell strange incident that took place not in July of 1947, but around June 18th. June 18th is the date I believe that the real Roswell crash happened. But anyway, I'm going to let Mr. Uh, Rick Doty speak all he wants to informally, and you just want to make him very feel welcome and very, and then you have tons of questions to ask to Mr. Doty, and I'm sure he will answer to the best of his knowledge. And because I have lots of questions too. So right now we're going to have an introduction, self-introduction by Mr. Richard Doty or Rick Doty. Let's give a big hand to Rick Doty.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. There's a long story connected to the relationship we have. My agent actually knows him and actually got us together. So, anyways, yeah, that's it was tarnished for a few years, but now we're friends. We're friends. Okay, I always do this in my lecture. Every lecture, and don't feel offended, but how many intelligence or counterintelligence officers do we have in the room? Got one. And you notice I didn't raise my hand. Okay, so I'm a former. Okay, so and Norio kind of talked about the differences between an intelligence officer, a counterintelligence officer, who can also be a counter-espionage officer. And I was a counterintelligence and a counter-espionage officer during my time in the intelligence community. So the way I like to run these things is, I'm sure you have 1,000 questions out there, and I'm gonna run this for the audience. I always like to do this. So I'm gonna give you a quick 15 minutes of some things that I want to talk about. And then after that, I'll open it up and you can ask me any questions you want, as long as the questions don't pertain to something that I know is still classified. Okay. And there are still some things that I can't talk about that I had access to primarily out at Area 51 because I worked there. But other than that, I'll answer any kind of questions you want. I think the biggest misconception in with me and with the Air Force and with the U.S. intelligence community is something that people call disinformation, and Norio brought that up, or misinformation. There's nothing, there's no manuals, there's no documents in the U.S. intelligence that talks about disinformation or misinformation. We call it deception operations. So if we were going to run an operation such as Project Seven Lambs, and I'm not giving away any secrets, was the name of the Paul Benowitz operation. Okay? And how that started. Seven Lambs. How that started was Paul Benowitz. He was a businessman, a scientist. He ran a company called Thunder Scientific Laboratories, which was right outside Kirtland Air Force Base, the Wyoming Gate. He lived in the Four Hills area. In his backyard, ran up against the perimeter of the Air Force Base, Kirtland Air Force Base perimeter. On the other side of that perimeter was Monsanto weapons storage area. At the time, it was the largest nuclear weapons storage area in the world. And then not only was it a weapon where they stored them, they also performed maintenance there. The 3098th Aviation Depot Squadron was one of two units. The other one was classified that modified or repaired nuclear weapons, Air Force nuclear weapons. So that's what was at Manzano. It's highly secure, guarded by, at that time, United States Air Force security police. In the Air Force, the military police are called security police. Plus, they had electronic defense mechanisms all over Manzano. And so, what Paul found, and Paul was also a photographer, and he saw things flying around Kirtland, not only near the airfield, because the Kirtland Air Force Base, as I'm sure everyone knows, shares a runway with Kirtland Air Force Base. Kirtland Air Force Base shares a runway with the Albuquerque International Airport. Okay, and I don't know if you know it or not, but the priority is always the Air Force, always the military. They're the number one priority under FAA standards. So we can get into something a little bit later. But anyways, so Paul started taking pictures of these things, strange things. And what Paul did was he contacted the commander of the security force at Manzano. Lieutenant Colonel Ernie Edwards was his name. And Ernie Edwards was on a security council committee for the base. I was a counterintelligence officer for the base. When I first got there, I was a young counterintelligence officer. I got out of college. I was in the regular Air Force. I got out of the regular Air Force, went to college, and then I went to a year of pretty intense training to be an intelligence officer. And so we would have meetings once a month, the base, and with the chief of security police for Manzano and all the different agencies that were on Kirtland back at that time. And there were a lot of agencies out there that were classified. The National Security Agency that ran Starlight facility. At that time, it was classified. You couldn't call them the National Security Agency. We had another nomenclature. We called them Defense Communications Agency, the DCA, which doesn't exist anymore. But so that was their cover. So during one of the meetings, Ernie told me he'd got a phone call from this guy by the name of Paul Benowitz, and Paul says that he was photographing things flying around Kirtland Air Force Base. Now, I'm the counterintelligence officer. That's information I needed to know. So then I said, okay, well, we'll check into it. So I did some checks to find out who this guy was, Paul Benowitz, and I find out that he owns this facility and he had a government contract. And then maybe 2 days later, Colonel Edwards called me up and said, hey, Rick, he said, we need to, come on, get some chairs for you. Welcome. We have. Okay, so
can you give us a year?
This was 1979. Okay, and so then Colonel Edwards called me and said, "Hey, listen, this Benowitz guy has taken photographs of something that you really need to know about, and you need to come up here because I don't want to talk over the phone. Phones are not secure." So I go up there, and he tells me that Paul had sent him some pictures. Now, what was happening on Kirtland Air Force Base at that time was highly classified drone program. It was the United States Air Force's first endeavor to build and fly drones. And the way they flew them back in those days, or tested them, was they would be launched out of an aircraft. And that aircraft would have to be in close proximity to these drones. The drones were pilotless, and they were controlled by an aircraft. The aircrafts were most of the aircraft were C-135s or their DC-707s in the civilian side of it, or some were being controlled by a C-130, which is a propeller-driven Air Force cargo plane. So, and now Paul thinks that these drones were a threat to these other aircrafts because he didn't understand what these drones were doing out there. So then that's how we, United States Air Force, got involved in this. I went out there with another agent, introduced myself to Paul, and asked him how he got those pictures, why he was taking pictures, and Paul told me he was open, didn't hide anything. He said, I'm a veteran myself. I have a government contract. I love this country, and I'm fearing that there's a threat to national security, and that's why I'm turning all of this over to you. So I said, well, can you show me the negatives? That's what we wanted, because we didn't want these pictures out there, because what he took pictures of were classified, top secret. It was an SAP, meaning special access program. Special access programs are entirely top secret, containing sensitive compartmented information that we don't want our enemies, back in those days, Soviet Union or the Chinese, to get. So now what I did, you want to get a chair?
I can get you.
So what I had to do was I made a report and sent it up to our headquarters. And once our headquarters got it, which we did it electronically through what we call an inlet system, but once it got up there, I figured, I did my job. We'll see what headquarters said. Well, an hour after, because the messages are immediate messages. Anybody who's been in the military, how many veterans do we have in this room? Thank you for your service to every one of you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I get a phone call on our KY3, which is a secure telephone system. So I'm sure some of you veteran KY3. We have another room, and it rings, and our admin specialist comes in and says, Agent Doty, you got a phone call on KY3 land system 4. And I went in there, and it was the chief of counterintelligence for the Air Force, Colonel Law. He said, we got a problem down there at your base. Well, I thought, wow, what did I do, sir? He said, this Benowitz guy, he's taking pictures of classified programs. I said, yes, sir. He said, we're sending you down an operational plan. Now, if you are veterans in this room, if you've ever been in any kind of operational organizations, the government doesn't move anything across the room without an operations plan. And so they created the operations plan at headquarters, sent it down to me the next day. And it was a Friday, I remember this. And in that operations plan, they dictated exactly what we, the counterintelligence people, had to do. And in that plan was we had to run a deception operation against Paul Benowitz. We don't want him to disclose what he was seeing out there. So now this operation, Seven Lambs, involved not just Rick Doty. I mean, I've had this, question so many times. Why did you do this and why did you do that? Well, I didn't. It was controlled by headquarters, number one. I had a chief of counterintelligence at District 17, which was what OSI was called at Kirtland at the time. Rick Serto was his name. And I had other agents. So there were a total of 16 agents, not all OSI, but we had an FBI agent, Jerry Brown, who was on this group, and we had NSA personnel. So anyways, we got together at Kirtland. We looked at what the Air Force said we have to do, and then we implemented it. And that's how the Paul Benowitz case started. Now, one of the things, myself and another agent, Steve Adset, went out to, a few days later, went out to Paul's business, Thunder Scientific, and we said, hey, Paul, we wanted to get to know him. One of the things you do in counterintelligence, you make friends with people, and then you try to recruit them on your side, or not necessarily as spies, but just as assets. So I'm going to be friends with him. We want him to be friends with us. And he immediately took a liking to me, almost immediately. And he said, yeah, I'll do whatever you want to do. And I said, well, what do you think these things are, Paul? And this conversation was recorded, not by me, but by the other agent. He said, well, they're UFOs. They're aliens. I said, okay. I said, well, why do you think they're aliens? He says, I was MUFON and I was NICAP. NICAP, I'm sure some of you know what NICAP was. I was a NICAP investigator for the Air Force, for NICAP for years. I know what UFOs are. I also have had contacts with extraterrestrials. Those things that are flying next to those planes are UFOs, and they're hostile. Now, the plan's set in place right there. I didn't even have to say anything to him. I didn't have to try to convince him that these were UFOs. He already told me what he believed, and all I had to do was strengthen his belief, and that's how we did it with Paul Benowitz. And another thing we did, and this always comes up, why did you break into his house? Why did you plant this stuff in his house? We had a contract with Paul Benowitz, a written legal contract. And we wanted to investigate this, and we convinced Paul that the only way we can investigate this is to plant or give him some information or items, electronic devices, to place in his lab, in his house. Yeah, do it. We give him the contract, and we said, we need to go in and check on this stuff. He said, here's my keys, here's my alarms, because he had alarms on his two different alarm systems on his house and his lab. Go in anytime you want to. Okay, so we didn't break into his house. We didn't plant anything. Every single thing that we placed in there, he knew about. Number one, he was a scientist and he was smart. He had his own devices that he had built. So we couldn't trick him into planting some pen register or a covert listening device or anything like that, or a camera. So we told him. And now we did go in. We did go in when he wasn't there. And we did collect the data that was being collected on some of our devices. But we always told him. Okay. Now, there are two instances, I should say, where we did something that he never learned about. And those things are still sensitive, and I can't talk about them. But they didn't have anything to do with tricking him or anything like that. It had to do with a signal collector that he had, that the United States Air Force gave Paul Benowitz $135,000 to duplicate something. Another thing Paul was doing was he was collecting electronic signals, frequencies from the base. Now, at the time, the Starlight facility out there was doing something at that time was highly classified. They had laser systems out there. The Soviets had satellites flying over bases. We had a laser system that could be shot up in the air, hitting the lens of the Soviet satellite, blinding them. So the Soviets couldn't take pictures of the base. Now, it wasn't just at Kirtland. We obviously had them out in some other sensitive bases. But Paul was collecting the classified signals and frequencies that they were generating. Well, we couldn't have him do that. And that's why NSA got heavily involved in this. And that's why we did some things that nobody's going to know about because it's highly classified. Not necessarily because we did it, because of how we did it, the sources and methods. Anytime you hear of something's classified, or if you submit a FOIA request, and I'm sure some of you have submitted FOIA requests, if the material contains sources, intelligent sources, or methods, you'll never get it. You're never going to get that stuff. You're just not going to get it. So, so that's another thing we had to do to a deception operation against Paul. The other thing that I was accused of is drugging him. Now, what we did was Paul was, number one, he was a heavy smoker, smoked, I don't know, 4 or 5 packs of cigarettes a day. He drank a quart or half a gallon of Coca-Cola every day. He drank coffee. Didn't take care of himself. Well, he was taking medication. And as we delved into this project, this operation, we asked Paul if we could look at his medication that he was taking and maybe it's helping with it. Now, I didn't do that because I'm not a doctor. But we had a doctor, a civilian, a GM14 physician, and a pharmacologist who looked at everything he was taking and realized he shouldn't be taking some of that medication, and some of the other medication he was taking too high a dose of, or too low of a dose, or that. So, anyways, we were able to straighten out his medication. So we never drug him. We never gave him anything. That never happened. Okay, so you'll hear stories about us doing that, but we never did that. The other thing that now this investigation, Seven Lambs, had a lot of different facets to it. We're out there deceiving, keeping the classified information from being disclosed. But we also found out that Paul had taken. He's a pilot. Paul was a pilot. He had a private pilot rating. He had his own plane, which is a single engine plane, and he flew all over. But he would fly up to Dulce and back because he was convinced that the aliens that he was seeing over the flight line, flying in these little drones, although they weren't called drones back then, were coming out of Dulce. He was thoroughly convinced that Dulce was where they were coming from. Now, along this troubled road that he was traveling, he met Gabe Valdez. Now, I'm sure most of you know who he is. He was a state trooper, New Mexico state trooper, stationed in Dulce. Been there for forever. Who investigated cattle mutilations, and he also made contact with a certain person who told Gabe that there was an underground base at Dulce because he was down there. He'd been there. He'd seen the base. He knew what was down there. Hesitant to say who that person was, but maybe later on, if a question comes up, I might say. But anyways, so then Gabe and Paul got together, and Paul was then, because Gabe thoroughly convinced Paul that the base was in fact where these extraterrestrials that were being seen around New Mexico and southern Colorado were coming from. So we had that. And this Seven Lambs also involved an espionage operation. Paul Benowitz had a employee working in his lab, Thunder Scientific, that was providing information to a foreign country, what we call a hostile country, which was back in those days, Soviet Union, Red China, Cuba, North Korea, and one of those, and the Eastern Bloc countries. Anyways, so that was, now anytime there's an espionage operation in the United States, it's controlled by the FBI, not the OSI. And we could run with them because we're all federal agents too. But it was the FBI. They have a mandate by law to investigate that. So now we have to worry about this espionage operation. And then comes Leo Sprinkle and Alan Hynek. They come in, unbeknownst to us, and give Paul a computer monitor. And Paul doesn't tell us he has this or got it from Leo or Alan for some time. But one day I was in his office at the lab and I noticed, I mean, I knew what he had before. I noticed his computer and I said, or this computer monitor, I said, Paul, where'd you get that? Oh, Alan Hynek gave it to me. I said, when was this? A couple months ago. Why didn't you tell me this, Paul? Well, I didn't think anything of it. So, so I said, well, Paul, we need to take this and look at it, make sure there's nothing in it that you shouldn't be in it, any bugs or anything. Oh yeah, I would take it. So we have computer experts and Joy, she was our computer IT expert out there with OSI, and she came and took it apart, put it back together. There wasn't anything in it, but so and then Leo brings in this person called Myrna Hansen, and I don't know how many know about Myrna Hansen. She was an abductee and this happened up in northern New Mexico. Gabe Valdez investigated that case. And so now Paul's worrying about his lab, Myrna Hansen, Leo Sprinkle, Alan Hynek. So what we did was I got with the FBI and we knew at one particular point where Leo and Alan Hynek were staying at a hotel not far from the base. And we went out there and read them a riot act. And then they left. And then we didn't have to worry about them anymore. So now there was an incident that happened, and I told this story before. About 2 years in the investigation, 2.5 years into the investigation, Paul and his wife invited myself, a guy by the name of Jerry Miller, and Jerry Miller was assisting OSI. He wasn't an OSI agent, but he was a Project Blue Book investigator way back. Investigated hundreds of sightings. He was also an intelligence officer, but not OSI. He was an intelligence officer, not a counterintelligence officer. And Steve Adset, who was my assistant, they invited us over to the house to Steve Adset to eat, to have dinner. And we had a marvelous dinner, and we moved from the dining area into this other room adjacent to the kitchen. It was a room with a couch, and I sat on the couch, and over here were 2 lounge chairs. Jerry Miller sat in one, and Paul sat in another, and the other agent, Steve, sat next to me. Against the wall in front of me, it was just a wall, just a plain wall, sliding doors were off to the right of that. They had cathedral ceilings in the house. The wife had just served coffee to us. And I'm looking at the wall, and all of a sudden I see something, a bright ball on the lower left bottom of the wall that I'm looking at. And I'm looking at it, and I'm just staring at it, and it starts moving. So I hit Jerry's knee, and Jerry says, I'll explain that later. So we watched this, all of us in this room. The ball went up, the wall, it came out, it spun around. It's about the size of a softball, probably a little bit bigger. Sparkles around it, lights emitting from inside of it. Went all the way up to the top of the ceiling. And there was a chandelier and a light above it, and it was flying around that. Not anybody said anything. I just stared at it. And I watched it. I went over to the other side of the room, went back up to the ceiling, went back to the wall, and then went back down and disappeared. Mrs. Benowitz had just come out, and she was bringing some brandy. And she said, oh, you met our friends. I looked at Jerry, and now Jerry's the scientific guy too, okay? And I just hunched my shoulder. And I don't know. So when he tapped his watch, that was watch your time, make sure we don't have any missing time. Because Jerry knew more about these things than I did. Well, we didn't have any missing time. So now immediately, Jerry says, "What is that, Paul?" Paul says, "It's the aliens." I don't know. I don't know what you saw it. It happens all the time. He said, even in our bedroom, we go to bed and we see it flying around the ceiling. So, myself, Jerry, and Steve, we get together and kind of huddle and saying, "What's next?" Jerry said, "Let's go get some equipment and bring it in the house real quick." Fortunately, Jerry had it in his car, so we brought all this equipment. I'm not a scientist, so he brings it in and he's telling Paul, "I'm going to set this up, set that up, set this up," and we did, and we recorded, not that obviously, but we recorded some other ones because we put um, um, a covert surveillance system that highly highly sensitive cameras that activated on movement, and we filmed this stuff, and they were right. It happened all the time. But our question is, what was it? Where did it come from? Now, I think the consensus was Paul was doing this. I think we thought Paul's doing this. Paul's trying to convince us. Okay, so we don't confront Paul right away. So what we did was we went in. When I told you earlier, we went into his house, a clandestine entry, and we set up some things, as I was telling you about, some sensitive. Got a chair for. Okay, we set up equipment in there, and we also did something that would have determined whether Paul was involved in this. And after looking at all the material that we had collected, we came to the conclusion that Paul wasn't doing this. Okay, who was doing it? Well, the investigation lasted up until 1985, and we never found out who did this or how it was done.
What it was.
Or what it was. Now,
Not the NSA across the street.
No. So what was the conclusion? We don't know.
High strangeness.
Non-human intelligence, perhaps. Was Paul really telling us the truth on a lot of things that we didn't believe him? Probably. Another thing that happened, Paul calls, and this is like 3 years into it. Paul calls me, and it's a Friday night. Okay, now I'm single. Okay, I'm single through all this time, and I was gonna go out. I was dating this girl, and I had a we could take her out a nice restaurant and everything. Actually, High Finance. If you know where that is, we were gonna go there. And Paul calls me and says, "You got to get over here. You got to get over to my house." I said, "What's wrong, Paul?" He said, "You're not gonna believe what I took pictures of." So I had to call my girlfriend up and say, "Yeah, gonna be a little late." And so I go over to his house with another agent, and Paul says, and he was, I'm sorry, we went to his lab or his business, Thunder Scientific, because he had a photo lab there, his own, he developed it. And when I got there, he was coming out, and he said, look at this, and he put the pictures down. And I said, well, explain, what are you looking at? He said, UFO. I said, well, where'd you take that picture? He said, I left. He landed. He went up to Dulce, flew around, landed at Dulce, refueled, took back up, climbed back up in the clouds, was flying southeast, about near Springer, New Mexico. If anybody know where that's at, a little bit west of Springer, and this huge, and he took a picture of it. Huge UFO came in, saucer shape, and almost sat on top of his left wing. And he took pictures. Paul had one of his employees with him with a camera, an AE1, Canon AE1. If any, sure somebody old timers, I'm not old timers, but you know what an AE1 is. Back in those days, that's the best I think they had. Anyways, he was taking pictures of this thing, and Paul had it. Now, I looked at this stuff and I thought, Paul faked this. I thought this is my first, okay. I didn't say that to him. I said, okay, what happened then, Paul? He said, well, I could look inside the windows and see these aliens in there. I said, okay. And there were a couple of pictures that weren't really clear, but they kind of indicated. I said, okay, I'm going to need everything you got, including the negatives. Yeah, okay, I'll give them to you. So I get them, and I go out to the base. I had to do reports and all this stuff, put the stuff in a filing cabinet and secure it. And I was going to have to send it up to headquarters. Then I called my boss, and I said, John, you ain't going to believe this. And John said, what have we got? And I told him some of it. So he comes out, and we have a little meeting, and we get on the secure lines. And what are we going to do now? That Paul's taking pictures of UFOs. We don't believe it that he's involved, and now he's taking pictures of them. And I think the consensus of my boss and the assistant chief of counterintelligence headquarters thought that he made this up. Somehow he made this up. And they said, send everything to us. We'll look at it, and then we'll determine whether if it's fake or not. Well, we sent it up the next Monday or Tuesday, whenever it was, through courier, and everything is highly classified. Went through an armed forces courier system, and so I said, okay, I did my job. Well, to this day, I don't know what the conclusion or consensus was. Nobody ever told me. I kept asking, what do you guys think? It went on beyond. It went above our heads. That's Colonel, United States Colonel, Air Force Colonel Richard Law, Chief Counterintelligence for the Air Force, tells me it went above my head. Well, I'm down here, so I'm not going to get that. I'm not going to get the answer.
Whatever happened to Benowitz's photos? Like, I hear you talking about all these photos he took, and I'm like salivating.
Well, all the photos went. Everything that we got had to go to headquarters. I couldn't keep them. I couldn't make a copy.
But he didn't keep them on his estate?
No.
Okay.
He never kept anything. He gave us every single thing he had, to the best of our knowledge. Okay. Now, eventually, this ended. That investigation ended, and Paul was in a hospital twice after that. But 18 years later, he passed away. So we didn't kill him. He had a number of medical issues that caused his dismay, and so those are the things I want to bring up, and then we'll open up for questions. So if you have questions,
Can you just repeat the questions when they ask so the listeners online
yeah,
can hear?
yeah. Nora, you pick the people.
Yeah, okay.
Yes.
Do you think there is a supposed Dulce base?
Do I think there's a Dulce base? Okay. At the time when this was happening during the 80s, I and other intelligence personnel went up there a number of times with equipment. And one night, and Paul was with me this particular night. We had drove up there. We didn't. He wasn't flying, and we were down at the bottom. It was in our vehicles. We had 4-wheel drive CJ7 Jeeps, and we were at the bottom of the mountain. And I saw these lights up on top, very strange looking lights. And then 45 minutes later, I saw helicopters. Wow, what is this? So I don't know what it was at the time. So we went back, and I do the report. I did my report, and I thought, that's odd. Let me see. There's no military bases around there except for Fort Carson. I want to check with Fort Carson. So I get on the line to one of the intelligence officers in the military intelligence unit up there, and I asked him some questions. He said, we can't talk about this over the phone. So I went up there, and I went into a classified room, and they said, we use that area our special forces units use that area. And the lights that you see are in the ground. They're planted in the ground, and they're operated on a frequency. When a helicopter is coming in, they turn the a particular frequency on, which lights up these lights. And when you're down at the bottom looking up, my God, they look like they could be UFOs up there. But that's what we determined. Now, jump ahead. There was a guy by the name of Joe Firmage. He was prominent within the UFO. Uh, I should say the UFO dilemma. But anyways, he was involved in the UFO community for some years, and he was a rich guy with a lot of money. He spent a lot of money with a team of people, experts that went up there to try to find the Doty base. Very sophisticated equipment. I don't know what the equipment was. He found nothing. The only thing up there is an old mine, Anaconda, which is a mining company way back. I'm sure some of you know. Did an exploration up there for uranium and some other mineral, and so they dug holes and they had things facilities up there. But that was back in the '60s. Now, I have not met a single person, military wise, special forces, tier 1 or tier 2 people that will tell me that there's an underground base there. And the name I don't like to bring up, but is a guy by the name of Phil Schneider who started this story. Now, there's a number of other people who did exclusive investigations into Phil Schneider, one of them being Phil Klass. Phil Klass was a UFO debunker. I'm sure some of you know who he was. He passed away several years ago, but he actually got, and they were on the internet for the longest time, Phil Schneider's medical records. This was before HIPAA. And in those records showing that he was a high voltage technician, and those injuries that he got were done by wires hitting him. So, and his wife admitted to Phil, because he had a recording of her. Later on, she said she never told Phil. Phil used to keep a pocket recorder and covertly record. But so, you know, you believe what you want to believe, but I know nothing. I've never read any, and I'll tell you right now, I've never read anything in any kind of classified documents or publications during my time in that mentioned any kind of underground facility at Dulce. The Special Forces training area is mentioned in classified documents, but that, in fact, they picked the Archuleta Peak area to train the Delta Force in the late '70s. And Delta Force was our anti-terrorist commando unit that was created in 1977. They trained up there because it was such a remote place. And I know that for a fact. It has since come out in the open. So the answer is I've never, I don't know anything about any underground facilities there.
What about Dugway?
You know, I was only at Dugway once, and on official business, and so I don't know what that's an Army facility. So, but I don't know about that.
Question for you, Rick.
Yes.
I made a presentation here a few months ago about my grandson who was a construction contractor, and in 2017 they got a job on base, and it was a 5-minute elevator ride down from the warehouse on the backside of Monsanto base, and there was a large concrete facility that was 200 feet wide, 50 feet tall, and it was probably 800 feet underground, and it had over 50 aircraft in this deep underground facility under Monsanto. And there's been other stories about other underground facilities. I knew a guy that worked at the air traffic control tower night shift, and one night in the mid 2000s, he saw 99 cement trucks enter the base at the Louisiana gate, drive up the frontage road by the airport, and go into one of the Air Force hangars east of the tower to do some underground concrete pouring. So can you speak in general about underground facilities at Kirtland, and if they are significant compared to like at Area 51 and other bases around the country?
Well, Monsanto had 3 plants, plant 1, plant 2, plant 3. Plant 1 was an administrative control for the mountain is dug out. Okay, there's
But
facilities
this
inside.
facility
I'll
was
get to
much
that.
smaller.
And plant 1 is the area that's controlled. Plant 2 is where all the fission weapons were manufactured. Fission. The fusion weapons were on the east side of the mountain in plant 3. Okay, there's another facility that is south in the southeast corner of Monsanto. You go in it, and I've been in there. It's a huge facility with these huge doors that you could easily bring an aircraft in. But I was never in those. But I know that there were different levels under there. Now, what they did with those levels, I don't know. But there's one facility when you first walk in to your immediate left, huge facility, and on the door in stencil it said, "Open upon presidential orders only." Well, I never went in there. So I don't know what was in there. But I know that Monsanto, there were 4 different construction projects inside Monsanto. The first one was one in 1952 when they built Monsanto. They dug it out. The mountain's there already, and they started digging. And the second one is in 1959. Third one was in 1968. Now, what they built, I don't know. I certainly wasn't around there. So I know there's things there that are underground, but I don't know what they are. I can't speak to what they are. Yes, sir.
Yeah. So the one of the things that trips me up a little bit is like, so Paul Benowitz, did the operations around Paul Benowitz change like surveillance operations for any civilians that live near the base? Because if like a private civilian who happens to be on your side witnesses these, clandestine things, films them or photographs them, what's to stop theoretically a foreign agent from doing exactly what Paul was doing, but then just not to let you guys know if civilians were living that close to the base so they could see classified aircraft?
Okay. Every single Air Force base, both in the United States, overseas, have what we refer to as a counterintelligence net around the base. We have agents that go out and recruit people who live near the base. And what we look for primarily are retirees, military retirees, and tell them, listen, if you see somebody near the base, you see something around the base, you see something suspicious, call us, to contact us. Kirtland Air Force Base had one of the most concentrated counterintelligence net that I've ever seen. And so we had that covered.
Okay, let me ask you a very, very mysterious question. In 1988, there was a Fox TV 2-hour live program called UFO Cover Up Live, in which Area 51 was mentioned only for about 5 or 6 seconds. But some people say that you were on that program in dark silhouette. Is that true?
No.
No, it's not.
That was Robert Collins.
Oh, Robert Collins. All right.
And there's a reason why I wasn't there. I was here in New Mexico. Some of you might know I was at one time a state police officer. I was in the State Police Academy when that was aired live. So, and the producer, I should say the assistant producer, in 1995, when people thought, well, that's Rick Doty, it has to be Rick Doty, it's Falcon, Rick Doty. She admitted at a UFO convention that was Robert Collins. So it was Robert Collins.
What name did he go under in the shadowy figure?
Falcon.
What?
Falcon.
Okay, Falcon.
Falcon.
We had the Falcon, and then we had the alien interview with the Victor. So those were the two shadowy figures that everyone was trying to pin on you back in the day.
Right. And there's a thing called the aviary. I'm sure everybody knows what the aviary, a list of people. I was involved in the aviary, but my code was Sparrow. Falcon was Richard Helms, the former director of Central Intelligence. And that came out many years ago. But yes.
Thank you for coming today. Where do you live now?
I live in Grants.
Okay.
Bought a
My
house out there
question is,
years ago.
with your intelligence background, with the story you told us about Benowitz that probably nobody knew till today about the two mysterious, the UFO and the lights in his house, we all believe in UFOs. We wouldn't be here. You're the expert. Are they real? Are aliens real? What do you know from the level you have above us to know what's real and what's not? In your world of
Yeah, I understand.
make believe and real
Yeah.
stuff all mixed together.
Sure.
Spill the beans.
Extraterrestrials.
You said you had two different cases you can't explain with him.
Yeah.
What is it?
In 1979, there was an incident that happened out at Kirtland Air Force Base. It's called the Coyote Canyon incident, where a UFO had landed. A security guard from Sandia National Laboratories witnessed it, reported it. His vehicle engine went off. He couldn't transmit on his portable radio or a vehicle radio. And I investigated that case. Now, before that, I wasn't briefed in anything regarding UFOs. And I tell you, people don't want to believe this, but during that year-long, the intelligence operations course, counterintelligence course, counterespionage course, FLETC, none of those training sessions were there ever mentioned anything other than the U.S. Air Force no longer investigates UFOs. That's it. There was nothing ever mentioned. So when I got to Kirtland Air Force Base and I'm out there investigating this UFO landing, I come back to the base to my boss and said, John, I said, I gave him what happened and I had to do a report. He said, I need to send you over to get briefed. Okay. I said, okay, briefed in what? He said, a different level of clearance. So a couple days later, I went over to the Air Force Special Security Office at the Air Force Weapons Laboratory on the west side of Kirtland Air Force Base for this briefing. And that's where I got the information about what the United States government knows about extraterrestrials. And the first part of the briefing is historical facts. Roswell happened, but it didn't happen the way people wrote about it. This is 79, right? Bill Moore's book hadn't come out yet. Okay, remember that. But other people had talked about Roswell. In 1970, there was this guy who was stationed at Walker Air Force Base who talked about it in 1970, but it didn't get any press. Nobody, believed it probably. Anyways, the official briefing I got from official government personnel, a full-bird colonel and a civilian, is that the United States government's first involvement with extraterrestrials was Roswell. But the craft crashed in Corona, New Mexico. Okay, the debris trail was on the Brazil Ranch. That was the antenna off the crashed vehicle, crashed UFO. The craft that crashed was found by an archaeological team. Stan Friedman interviewed those people. Now, what happened as they pieced this together was in June of 1947. Everybody knows here we have some very severe lightning storms in New Mexico. There was one occurring, and these two extraterrestrial crafts are flying through, and somehow their avionics got messed up. They collided. One crashed at Corona. The debris field is at the Brazil Ranch. The second craft crashed out at Paloma Peak, west of Magdalena. That wasn't found until 1949. And so those are the two crafts that crashed in New Mexico. We were also told about the 1953 Kingman crash, and
What was
the
that?
1953 Kingman
Arizona.
Arizona crash.
Cape Girardeau, Missouri. That was
There were a whole number of listings. No, there was not.
It also had nothing to do with microwave, triangular towers.
Not the briefing I got. Okay, nothing. No, and it wasn't shot down by a F-86 or anything like that. I mean, I've heard every one of those stories. At least the briefing I got, and I consider that the number one briefing. That's the classified briefing, and I believe what I was told, because there's always the question. Well, maybe they were trying to fool you. No, because of everything that I learned later on and investigated later on, went right back to the briefing I got, which proved it. There was no video. There was a 16 millimeter movie camera. That was the Roswell recovery. We watched, 32 minutes of it. Yeah, I think that was longer than that, but we only got the 32 minutes.
You got to watch that video?
32 minutes.
film?
Everybody in that room got to watch it.
Wow.
Did you see the Holloman one?
No,
Did you see bodies?
we saw bodies.
Wow.
So since we're talking about Roswell, you know that one of my New Mexico heroes of disclosure is Steve Schiff, New Mexico representative from the 90s from Albuquerque, District 1. And I've had you speak about him in spaces before, but since you brought up Roswell, can you just, and I'm sure many people here already know the name, but can you let the crowd here know a little bit about his legacy involved in this in Roswell?
Yeah, Steve Schiff was an attorney. He was Attorney General in New Mexico. He ran for the House seat, and he was elected to the U.S. Senate, the U.S. House from New Mexico. He was also a member of the New Mexico Air National Guard. He was a staff judge advocate, and he was a strong believer in UFOs. He believed that Roswell happened. He tried to force the government, the Air Force, to tell the story, and as other representatives also. Harrison Schmitt, he turned to Harrison Schmitt, who was in fact former astronaut, senator here, a U.S. senator, and eventually the government had to do something, and so they put out that fiasco. Roswell case closed. Now, the guy that authored that is Richard Weaver, Colonel Richard Weaver. He was one of my bosses in counterintelligence. And he called me. Now, at the time, I was working for Dr. Hal Putoff at the Institute for Advanced Studies in Austin. Worked there for 12 years. Anyways, he called me and he said, "Hey, Rick," he said, we're working on this Roswell thing. I said, okay. He said, don't throw stones at me when you see it. It's not my business. It's the Secretary of the Air Force. She demands it. They wrote it. Her office wrote it, and I'm going to put my name on it. But then I'm going to retire in a year. And I said, well, what is it? What are you saying? He said, oh, no, we're discounting the Roswell. I said, how are you going to discount it? He said, and he was briefed the same way as I was briefed. He said, listen, the Secretary of Air Force wants this. I said, you know what feedback she's going to get? So anyways, that's the report that came out. Not any part of that report is factual. The animatronic bodies that they were saying were thrown out there, that wasn't until 1953 and 54. Nothing was happening in 1947.
It was Project Mogul. He forced the Air Force to admit the weather balloon was a lie. And so they came out with this report, which was it was Project Mogul. They were crashed as dummies. And it was just so ridiculous. So
yeah.
So when you were given this briefing, surely that was classified information, and yet you're able to disclose it to us here. When did the status of that information?
Because it was leaked out. When it was leaked out in 1998 at a UFO convention, somebody else, another agent, Meredith, unfortunately he passed away. He gave the UFO convention, the entire briefing that I got, even in more details than I'd ever talked about. And so waiting to see if he got arrested. He didn't get arrested. So
Is this speech online anywhere, or can this be found?
Wendell Stephen has every one of those. Wherever his archives are, you'd have to go there.
Dave Marler that lives here has all of them.
David Marler, yeah.
Yeah.
Do you know that, sir?
Yes, Norio.
Well, I have a question about two fascinating documents which came out. One of them came out in 1988, I believe, and this document was a roll of film, and which was sent to TV producer Jamie Chandra in Los Angeles, and the address from which this document roll of film was sent was from Albuquerque. Okay. Then the second document I'm very interested in is a document called SOM1, SOM1, and that document also states that originated from Albuquerque. Now, why is that such important documents, especially in the 80s, all came from Albuquerque, New Mexico? What's your opinion?
Good question. I think it was remailed. Back in those days, they had remailing. You could send it to a post office box here. It was remailed, and or to some other place. And I think Bill Moore probably settled that when he talked about that. Yeah. Okay, and then we talk about yes.
Just really quick, to finish Benowitz, when you finally made contact with him in '79, how early was he doing this, the filming? 75, 76?
No, probably a few months before that. Yeah, a few months before that. Yes. No, he hasn't answered. Go.
It's a two-pronged question. How much do you know about the different types of flying saucer propulsion? Last year, David Koresh talked about the 4 categories or 4 morphologies of flight. And then that follows into you said that they found an antenna for one of the flying saucers. At the Roswell crash, there was part of it that was recognized as an antenna. So, are you allowed to talk about the different types of flying saucer propulsion?
Well, I'm not. Okay, something in the military, I'm sure everyone that's ever had access classified information, there's such a thing as need to know. I didn't have a need to know that information. I never worked in that arena. Even when I was out at Area 51, I only had access to stuff that I was investigating. So I wouldn't know that. But we called the stuff that was found on the Brazil Ranch the antenna. We did that.
Okay.
It wasn't the extraterrestrial that said, "Oh, that's my antenna." So I mean, terminologies are entirely different.
Real briefly, years ago on YouTube, there was a dump of footage. I think it's Ivan0135 is the YouTube channel. It's or skinnybob.com is where they go over it. There's some filters they put on it. But is that footage part of the Roswell? That footage that you said that?
I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know if that is or not. The Victor video is there's a documentary coming out by Jon Stewart. I think once you watch that video, you're gonna see that that video is actually it was smuggled out of Area 51. So that's absolutely because not a single special effects person can find anything wrong with that or how they could duplicate it. So.
Do you know about Bob Lazar and whether he was also part of the whatever you call it, deception program? Was that?
I don't know. The only thing I know about Bob Lazar is that he talks about S4. Area 51 has S4. There's no advanced research and development facility at S4. I mean, and Nellis Test and Training Range called S4. The only research and development, advanced research and development facility that's called S4 is at Los Alamos. What he's referring to is S2 at Papoose. I was there. I was at S2. There's levels under S2. The different levels are called levels. And you're going to see this in a documentary that's coming out later this year that I was involved in making. We have the commander of the side of Nellis Test and Training Range. The people that work down in Papoose are going to talk about it. And you're going to see that it's not called S4. It's called the second level is called level 2 or level 3, level 4, level 5. And so anyways, I won't bore
Guys,
people with
when
it.
you ask them a question, try to project out so we can hear it online too. Thank you.
Yeah, go ahead.
Do you sympathize with people who take the position that they're skeptical of what you're saying now, given that your job previously was to be deceptive about the truth about UFOs, and given your subsequent career claiming to tell the truth about the reality of UFOs? Do you sort of sympathize with people who
Absolutely.
have a hard time?
Yeah. But what I tell them is prove that I'm still working for them. I'm not working for the government anymore. Why would I want to continue working for them? I'm not getting any money from them. What reason would I have to continue to provide deception information? I don't have any reason to do that, and nobody's come up with me and say, well, we found out that you're still working for them. No, I'm not. I left government service. Well, clarify this. I left intelligence service in 1988. I was brought back in 1991, but it didn't have anything to do with UFOs. It had something to do with when I was in Europe, a spy that we were looking for, but that had nothing to do with UFOs. And then I went to work for Dr. Putoff later on in 1994, and I did have classified clearance. I had a DARPA clearance because he was working on DARPA projects, but it didn't have anything to do with counterintelligence or counterespionage. It's scientific. It was scientific classification. So, go ahead. You have an answer.
Yes, you had mentioned that in the film of Roswell, that you saw bodies of aliens. Could you give us some kind of a description? Were they distinct enough that you could talk about?
Well, they were lying on the ground. They had the lower part of their torso was covered with a tarp or something. All you could see is the up from probably mid chest up, and they had large heads, large eyes. They were gray looking. Well, it's a black and white film, so it appeared to be a grayish colored. And what a lot of people are shocked about, and I've been talking about this, and Linda Howells talked about it. Many other people have talked about it. There was a live one that was captured. We know that. EBA 1, it was in captivity from 1947 to 1952. It lived at Los Alamos. A United States Air Force captain was its mentor or its handler. Now, Linda Howell actually interviewed him back in the 80s. He's long dead now, but he talked about the interaction they had. It took a long time for that extraterrestrial to be able to communicate because they didn't speak our language and we didn't speak their language. And they did it through hand signals and pictures and all sorts of things, but eventually they were able to communicate. And I don't know much more than that. And they were called EBAs. That was EBA 1. And if you want to believe it, believe it. If you don't, that's
What was the name of the guy?
EBA.
No, that she interviewed, that was the aliens caretaker from 52?
His name hasn't ever been released. You can ask Linda Howell, though.
Yeah.
Did you learn about that through your official counterintelligence
Yeah,
work?
yeah,
And it wasn't- okay.
yeah. That was in the briefing film that showed, they talked about the live one.
You saw the live one in the film?
No, we didn't, he wasn't, but the narrator said there was one live one. Yes.
Yeah, speaking of the briefing film, you had left off at the 1953 Kingdom crash. I wondered if there was more in the briefing film.
There were many others, and there were many other, a lot of more information about how we interfaced with him and things like that. But I don't remember every single thing that was in it. But Yes, yeah. Go ahead, yeah.
I'm really interested in the Benowitz stuff, so I want
Sure,
to
sure,
ask you,
yeah, absolutely,
all the equipment that was put in his home, was that all retrieved?
Yeah,
Did
absolutely.
the government take that monitor that Heineck and gave you?
No, he kept it.
Because, yeah, I kind of misunderstood. I thought that somebody from the government gave him a computer that was cooked to make him think a lot of what he was receiving was alien stuff.
No, he had his own computer. What we did was we checked it. Our IT people, you know, computer specialists made sure that he wasn't creating something from that computer. But no, to the best of my knowledge, he kept both.
One last question. That famous footage that Paul took in December of '79, I understand. Sub-freezing temperature from second story of his house of something like anti-gravitic coming around one's animal and going up and down. Did the government get that?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Curious if you have any opinion on the recent testimony made in front of Congress by David Grush and more recently by Carl Nell at the SALT conference. Just any general thoughts on that, and in particular, if you think what bearing it might have on changing kind of the seriousness with which the media and the public in general takes the subject.
Great question.
Well, yeah, that is. They talk about things that a lot of us intelligence officers already knew, and so it verifies what we've said, and it should wake up Congress to hold more hearings, at least the Senate. I can understand the Senate's going to promise to do it, but and there's a lot more that he said privately to other senators and other people that hasn't been out there in public. Some within I'm a member of the Advanced Working Group, which are mostly retired intelligence officers or retired military intelligence officers, and we know some of the things that he said privately, which would coincide with everything that you see out there, hear from other people. The particulars might be different, but like the Roswell case, you know, I don't read books about Roswell anymore because they're not true. I mean, to me, I mean, I see the real stuff that was given to me in the briefing, and then I read a book that says, you know, they were dummies or they were uh, 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 mutants. The Russians planted mutants. I mean, none of that stuff is real. Just to buy books. Yes.
John Strader with the UFO Hotspot. You know I'm obsessed with New Mexico cases, so I wanted to see if you have any information you can give us on the Farmington flyover in the 50s and the Aztec crash.
Okay. I did not see one single mention in any classified documents regarding the Aztec crash.
Really?
So nothing. And I think if you delve deep into that, there's a particular person his name always comes out. One of the I think he's ex-mayor or something was trying to get publicity, but I never saw anything. So
your stance is Aztec did not happen.
I've never seen anything official. No.
And the flyover, Farmington?
I've never heard anything about that.
That's huge. It was a 1950 3-day event, 9 interplanetary ships, over 500 vehicles with one glowing red command vehicle. Yeah, the 1950 Farmington Armada is a huge case that needs to be remembered or brought forth. It was 9 interplanetary ships, about 500 vehicles with one command ship that was glowing red. I spoke with Virgil, who was one of the last surviving witnesses of it. So there were hundreds of witnesses to this case.
What year?
1950 during March 16th, 17th.
And the newspaper has pictures.
Headline in the daily paper.
Yeah, I'm just saying I don't know anything about it. I'm not saying it didn't happen. I'm just saying I know. Yes.
Related to the question about Bob Lazar, Charles Hall lives here, who claims he dealt with aliens in the Area 51 area.
60s.
What do you believe of his story or not?
Yeah, I don't know what he saw. I wasn't there in 1960. He was there 66, 67. Yeah, I've never heard. I tell you what, this is on the internet. I mean, I'm not giving away any classified, but the classification of these extraterrestrials that the government knows is here. I mean, it's on the internet. You can download this. There's 9 species, and it explains this. Now there's 4 other pages that are classified that somebody, I don't know who leaked it, but you can get this off the internet.
What is the document? Where can we find
It's
it?
called Defense Intelligence Agency Identification of Extraterrestrial Races, and it lists 9 of them. I only knew 5 during my time in, but apparently they added some more. I mean, there's just Google that. I mean, it's there. It's on the. Pardon?
Form number?
No.
Because the military always has a huge.
Yeah, no. There's no form numbers. But.
You have it in front of us. Could you just give us the names as they classify them?
Yeah. I can read this to you if you want. I mean. Okay. Okay. The number 1 is the. Now I don't know why, and there's actually Linda Howell explains this better than I do. Why these things are named the way they are. Okay. The first one is acoloids. They're gray skinned humanoids, usually 3 to 4 feet tall, hairless with large heads, black almond shaped eyes, nostrils without a nose, slit from mouths, no ears, and 3 to 4 fingers, including thumb. Grays have been the predominant extraterrestrial beings of alleged alien contact since the 1960s. These entities are sometimes considered robots. Home planet LM002T Alpha Centauri star system. Number 2, Ebens, the one in the Roswell crash. The Ebens come from Zeta Reticuli star system, approximately 38.5 light years from Earth. These are the first extraterrestrials that the United States government encountered at the Roswell Corona crash site. They're 3 to 4 feet tall, skin. However, they always wear a tight-fitting grayish white jumpsuit. Large black eyes with distinct eyelids, small protruded nose, small openings for ears, and slits for mouth. Ebens have created biological entities that are part humanoid and part android. Archeloids, various heights, but usually between 4'9" and 5'8", normally wear grayish jumpsuits or two-piece silver suits. Black slanted eyes, oval heads, 4 fingers, protruded ears and nose. These aliens are distinguished by their arms having double joints. Their feet have 4 toes. Their ankles and foot contain just one bone. They have, we consider, a lower IQ than the others. They come from Epsilon Eridani star system. The quathyloids. Genetically engineered aliens come in 2 types, insect and humanoid. The insect types look like a large praying mantis. The humanoid types are the more human-looking entities. The insect type have high IQs. They come from Sirius star system. Hepaloids, these entities are often confused with grays or ebens. They're 4 to 5 foot tall, similar to ebens, but they're different biologically. They come from the Tau Ceti star system. Tarantuloids, 5'6", human-looking aliens, blonde hair. Females have longer hair. Very slender built. Eyes have invisible double opening lids. Human-looking mouth and nose. Come from Andromeda. Reptiloids, tall, scaly humanoids. Some reaching 7 foot. Face of a human, but eyes are larger, containing several eyelids and large irises. Hands are large, containing scales. Home planet, Barnard star system. Pleiades, Pleiadoids, they call them. Humanoids with Scandinavian features. Eyes, face, same as human, except for ear openings, much smaller. They come from the Pleiades star system. And then finally, Yaloids, Yawloids, 4 to 5 foot tall, gray skin with heavy scales, no ears or nose, plain slit for mouth. Does not have the ability to speak words, no vocal cords. Eyes oversized with large irises, strange odor emitted from body when frightened, responsible for harmful abductions. They come from Alpha Canis Majoris star system. And this is something that's interesting. The idiosyncrasies of the different extraterrestrials are that they come from different planets with different atmospheres. The bodies are different races, require different food or nourishment. The biological makeup of the bodies are all different. The brain structures are extremely complex, but different from one species to the next. The cell structures, the DNA, and skin textures are all different. So, one thing I think about when you're talking about different extraterrestrial races, they're all different entirely, and their technologies are all different. We have crafts out at Area 51 or at Tonopah that we found or they crashed or something, and they're all different technologies. So it's very difficult. This is one of the complex things, and Grush talks about this, and Lou Elizondo also talks about it, is you can't compare one, you can't say aliens. You gotta specify which one you're talking about because the technologies are entirely different. This is something I wanted to
This document?
Defense Intelligence Agency. This picture here is been on the internet. This is what we got. This is the actual picture I took off, the only picture I saved, of Paul Benowitz' computer. That's now, if you look at it, it looks like a painting to me, but this is a one. Now, here's the problem with this picture. Paul Benowitz didn't have a color monitor. It's a black and white monitor. But look at that. That's colored. How did that come on a black and white monitor? I don't know. I can't explain it. Nor Joy, our expert female computer person, couldn't explain it. And she sent it up to NSA. They couldn't explain it. So there's another idiosyncrasy in the Paul Benowitz case. Yes.
Okay, first of all, we still have plenty of time, 20 more minutes, for all kinds of questions, but before we go into the questions, I just like to recognize those who came to this meeting from far away, including places like Española, person from Doty, New Mexico. She's a cultural affairs director of the town of Dulce. And in fact, she was the one who allowed me to present the first ever Dulce-based conference in 2009. But anyway, who else is from Dulce? Okay, there's a lady here, you're from Dulce. Okay, so there's lots of interest in the subject matter, even far away. So thank you for coming all the way to Albuquerque for this presentation.
I'm just 80 miles away.
All the way from Eubank.
Denver? You came from Denver.
Okay, say Zeti.
Okay, so as a Doty official, the former official, Lauren Willis has a question.
Yes, ma'am.
I guess it comes off this gentleman that had asked about the crash site in Aztec. Did you ever come across one from our community? Because we're a small community, a lot of it's word of mouth, we're not in for it for the economic benefits of it, it's just people talking, and they say there was a crash up there on, I think it's Hickory Mountain, and they can pick it out, they describe the whole thing. Have you heard anything about a crash there? Right north of Jordan.
The only crash I heard about that was close to there was the crash just north of Tierra Maria radar site. The United States Air Force had a radar site at TA back in the 50s and 60s. Something crashed northeast of that.
Do they cover the stuff up? One time I was coming back from Albuquerque, and I saw, I thought it was the Morning Star. I saw it, and it came across, and right across the mountain, I seen this explosion, and I thought, oh, darn, I'm gonna see something in the newspaper, and there was nothing. But I know what I saw.
What year?
Oh, shoot.
You talking about the spy plane in
No,
'83, wasn't it?
It was like,
I don't know.
19 years ago.
Could have been a ball line.
I don't know what it was, but there was nothing in the newspapers about a crash.
Yes.
In my investigations, I've spoken to many native peoples from the Dulce area, and there's a lot of people in and out on whether or not there's a base there. But almost to every single person, and I think you mentioned seeing lights and orbs, things coming in and out of Archuleta Mesa. So I wanted to ask you guys, you know, just from the local perspective, what the locals think of that Archuleta Mesa, and are things coming in and out of it from your perspective?
From my perspective.
Well, from other people that live up there, what is the local legend of that place besides the base?
There's some weird things that happen, you know, just weird things that people talk about. You know, like someone mentioned on top of the mesa, they saw these two wolves that were white, two of them, they came out and looked at them, and yeah, it's just stories like that. One of the elders said that there's a place there where they saw it open and close, and there is a picture of a UFO right over Archuleta that someone caught. So it's just, you know, people see weird things.
It's a mystery there for the locals, right?
Well, they see weird stuff.
Yeah.
And so you hear all these stories. That's why I was asking about the crash. You know, they mention it. There was a crash there. They described the circular or whatever it was. But
If you know, there's probably crashes that are not reported to the government, and so we wouldn't have a record of it. There would be a record of it. And I know one a long time ago in the 60s, there was one at a mine in Nevada, and the miners did a report in this mining magazine, talked about it. Well, 15 years later, the government found that UFO buried in that mine, which was then abandoned. So, you know, it took 15 years for the government to find it. So it could very well be something like that, yes.
So there are extraterrestrial craft at Area 51 and on Tonopah?
Yes.
How many?
I don't know. I don't know many.
Do they test them out there?
They try to reverse engineer them, yes. Yeah. Yes.
You know, with your background, I understand the importance of keeping classified information classified. But with you coming out and talking about these subjects, has anybody told you to keep your mouth shut? I'm curious.
Everything that I've talked about today has been out in the public for over 20 years. Okay. So there's nothing I'm saying. Like I said earlier, there's things that I'm not going to talk about. Like there's other parts of the Paul Benowitz case that I can't talk about. And so, yeah, and if there's special access programs I worked on out at Area 51, which I'm not going to talk about it. Yes.
Do you agree with the overall portrait of you that emerges from the documentary Mirage Men? And if not, what part of that portrait do you disagree with?
A lot of things. Number one, that thing, the guy that produced that, Pilkington, he fully admitted in a deposition, because I sued him, but I had to get an attorney out of UK, that he dubbed a lot of my statements, and he readily admitted it. He owes me a lot of money. I haven't received a payment from him yet, and he's in Switzerland now. So that's to tell you. Yes, ma'am.
First, I'd like to thank you for coming.
You're very welcome. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Do you have anything truthful about what happened at Sunspot, New Mexico, where they said a janitor was downloading porn and the whole town had to be evacuated? Do you know what
I think probably a celebrity was on that. No, I don't know. I know a little bit about it because there was a retired FBI agent. He wasn't retired then, but he's retired now, who talks about that the government came in and immediately classified stuff. So I don't know what
the solar observatory, is that right?
Yeah. It's probably something involving non-human intelligence.
And it was also not only that observatory, but one in Hawaii as well.
Right, Hawaii too.
And
South America.
All three.
Yeah.
And they closed the post office for 7 days. They would not let people go back to their home that I interviewed.
Yeah, and they searched 4 houses too that people don't know about. The FBI came in there and the state police came in there and searched houses. Why? Why would?
Yeah, why would it be classified? He's downloading porn.
No,
Yeah.
but
So the
That's
thing I
right.
read was that it
It's
was
always
because it was
formed.
using DARPANet, it was using a federally managed
Yeah.
network.
Oh.
Yeah.
And that gave them
Right,
jurisdiction
jurisdiction.
to go in and look for.
Yeah, yeah.
This is a smart, well-informed crowd in here.
Yeah.
What about cattle mutilations related to Dulce?
Um, I'm not an expert in cattle mutilations. Linda Moldenhau is. I just know that there was an operation back in the 70s, and Gabe knew about this. Others have, called Open Range, Operation Open Range, whereby the United States government tested biological on not livestock, but on wild animals, bears, and but according to the government, and you can find this in on the internet, the report that's on the internet uh, says that they then didn't mutilate any animals or anything like that. But there's 16 pages out of 100 and some that are redacted. So what's in those redactions? No, right here. This.
Oh, the 9 different races that were mentioned, how do we know? We've seen these people? Or?
Obviously, the government has. I don't know how the government has this information, but obviously we know because we had them in captivity or whatever. I don't know. I don't know. But yes.
Curious how you feel about the tension between the U.S. government's mandate to protect the American public and the domain and so forth, versus the idea that the pursuit of happiness requires the understanding of the nature of reality and the idea that the government is covering that up. Like, I don't know, how do you feel about that tension?
Well, common sense disclosure is possible. I think we're going to get it. I really, really, really think we're going to get some good disclosure, but it's not going to be everything you want. Number one, they're not going to disclose anything that jeopardizes national security. That's off the table. There's no way in the world they're going to do that. And there's now, I don't know how many of you realize that last year the Senate Schumer Amendment S 2226 to the National Defense Authorization Act required all these different things for contractors and the government to do. I mean, listed, 16 or 18 pages. The problem, and the reason it was never passed, is that there's laws that this amendment would actually violate all these laws. Title 42, Title 50, Title 10 of the United States Code protects special access programs, sensitive compartmented information, and so you can't do that, and that's why it was watered all the way down. Plus, a contractor, okay, say for instance, everybody talks about contractors, DARPA contractors. Okay, a contractor puts a bid in for something highly classified because they have the expertise to do it. That's called sole source bidding, and they can get it. Okay, they can get it by law. The Secret Trades Act gives them the permission to do it. It's not any violation of law because I give Raytheon this contract, DARPA does, to make this widget because they're the only ones who can make the widget. So that can't happen. And all these things that the people want are already in laws. I mean, already embedded in laws. Danny Sheehan, I don't know if anybody knows Danny Sheehan. He talks initially about it, then people kind of slapped him. I'm good friends with Danny, okay, and said, Danny, look at this. And now Danny comes back and says, oh yeah, we got all these laws protecting all this stuff we can't release. So that's a problem. But I think at some point we're going to get some form of disclosure. Yes, ma'am.
Just one more question, because I see you on the bio with Emery Smith
Uh-huh.
and Team Tactical Advisor, and some of the things that they're talking about is this idea of soft disclosure.
Soft disclosure.
Yeah, they're gonna be sharing all this information with people. Do you have any opinion about the purpose and the reason for that, for this soft disclosure, so that people are aware of all this activity that happens?
Well, the soft disclosure is just common sense disclosures. They're going to disclose what they can, and you're never going to get what they don't want you to have. Just like a FOIA request. Now, You know, in 1974, Congress created a FOIA Act, Title V, United States Code. I don't know how anybody in here has ever submitted a FOIA request. You submit a FOIA request and you expect the government has this, I'm getting it. And you get something back saying, we can't find it. Or we can't acknowledge the existence or non-existence of it, or something to that effect. Let me tell you how FOIA actually works. I'm sitting in the office with all the classified stuff. The FOIA monitor is sitting out here. He or she doesn't have any access to any of the stuff that I have. She brings me in a form, 1114 form. You talk about forms. It's a government form, a DD form, or well, anyways, it's a form. She says, hey, you got a FOIA question for this. I'll say, I don't have it. Here. Okay. Yes.
Why did you decide to come forward?
My NDA expired in 2002. And so at the end of the year 2002. And I thought, there's so much bull that's being fed to the American public that I want to try to set the story straight. Now, I'm only one person, but there were others that came out during that time. I went to probably 70 or 80% of every single UFO convention. And, if you hadn't gone to them, you hear people talk at them about the same thing I'm talking about now, but they were talking about that. Wendell Stevens, Robert Dean, Clifford Stone was talking about this stuff 22, 25 years ago. It's not new. Okay. And that's why I say disclosure's already happened. We've already disclosed it. I got 150 episodes on Gaia. Now there were some, somebody asked me this, that the FBI came to my door, knocked on my door, and said, you did a Gaia or interview, and you said this, and this. I said, yeah, I did. You can't say that stuff. It's okay. I won't say it again. But I've never been the closest I ever came to being, well, I was investigated when Exempt from Disclosure came out, the first book by Robert Collins. There was some information in there that came from Los Alamos, highly classified Defense Intelligence Agency reports on what occurred, what extraterrestrial items were tested on the space shuttles, different space shuttle missions. And I tell you what, they were on my door and Collins's door, and they said, you got this stuff in the book, and I read it, and I said, I know who did it, and I didn't do it. So they did an investigation on me and Collins, and I'm sitting there thinking, I'm not going to go to jail for this. So I told him who did it. I squeal, yeah, you're damn right I did. And it was a guy in Los Alamos that gave Collins that stuff, because when we were meeting and talking about this book in a casino in Espanola, just right there, that casino in Espanola, one of the things this guy said, I said, when he showed us this stuff, I said, that stuff's still classified. You can't give that. He said, nobody's going to know where it came from. I said, I don't want to be involved in this shit. So when it happened and this person, they went up and confronted him, and he lost his job. He lost his security clearance. And so, those things happen, and I've been, warned a few times, and I realized what I said was, I went beyond the limits. And so I said, well, I won't say it again. I won't do that again. But
What was the name of that book?
Exempt from Disclosure.
Exempt from Disclosure.
Yeah.
Thank you.
There's 3 different.
I have
Yes.
kind of a question for us lay people that don't, I'm speaking for myself,
Sure.
don't understand legal things.
Sure.
How does a civilian on the other side of the fence end up being investigated by an Air Force intelligence agency? Wouldn't his constitutional rights
require him to be investigated by an agency of the Department of Justice, like the FBI?
Because our investigation was not a criminal investigation. It was a counterintelligence investigation. There's two different types, okay? Just like the government can go to the Foreign Surveillance Court in Washington, D.C. and get a warrant on you for a counterintelligence investigation. You'll never know it. They don't have to come to you and say, we just investigated you for this, because they can't use any of the information they gain in a criminal case, okay? But if they were investigating you for espionage and they go to court and they get the warrant to do whatever, a Title III warrant, meaning bugging your phone, but a PIN register, whatever, they have to tell you that in 30 days, with exception if they can get a permission from the judge to extend that out because they don't want the case to be mishandled. But that's the difference, okay? We would never, all the information that we were gathering on Paul Benowitz would never be used in a criminal investigation. It's a counterintelligence investigation. And we also had the FBI on board with us at all times. And Air Force Office of Special Investigation, Special Agents are federal agents. We're federal agents. Meaning we can investigate anything, and we have the power under the federal Title 18 to investigate civilians. Okay. Now, it's a little different for, say, for a military policeman. There's such a thing called the Posse Comitatus Act, which prevents the military from enforcing civil law. And there's exceptions to that, many. But that doesn't fall in the purviews of what we were doing. Yeah. The last thing I want to show you real quick is that's me in my younger days. And the guy right there is General John Vesey. He was the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the highest ranking military officer in the government. This was 1986. I was receiving an intelligence medal for the work I did on the Paul Benowitz case. So obviously, I did it right. I wouldn't have gotten that. And the unfortunate thing about it is it's classified. So he gave it to me. He gave this, and then he gave the diploma, and he had to take it back. So thank you for doing a great job. And one last thing. This book. Has anybody ever seen this before? Okay. I can guarantee you that 60% of everything in here is highly classified.
What is it called?
Yeah, all right.
The Blue Planet Project Trilogy. If you got this, the person who wrote this, no, they wrote it in a way that the government doesn't want. They don't want to come out and say, I want to take this back, because there's thousands of these already out there. But if you can get a copy of this and read this, like I said, 65% of everything in here is the real stuff.
And how does one obtain that document?
This book. Oh, you can get it on the internet. You can buy it on.
Let me get a picture of this.
Yeah. Who has them? Who has them already? Yeah. Yeah. You can get them online. eBay, Amazon. I know. But this stuff is the real thing. It's a real thing. A lot of it is speculation. I would say 65% is real, is truth, and then there's probably 30% speculation, and the other stuff is just not true. So, yes.
Just, so at the beginning you had said something about they're hostile. So.
Some are hostile.
And
some are benevolent, and some are hostile.
have they done any damage to us?
Yes. And Grush talked about it. Alzana talked about it. Carl Nell talked about it. humans have been killed by extraterrestrials.
Okay,
Okay.
anyway, this meeting is adjourned. But we're expecting to have some more meetings in the near future. But before that, here's a major announcement by Rose Eckhoff.
Hi, I'm Rose Eckhoff. I'm with one of the other UFO groups in town, as well as Oreos and a couple more. We are gonna have our first Albuquerque UFO conference in years, April 4th, 5th, and 6th. I'm gonna hand cards out, so you can check, our website will be out soon. We're working on the rest of our lineup. Norio is gonna be our master of ceremonies, introducing all the speakers.
That's so great. We need that so much.
This is the first time that a major UFO conference will be held in Albuquerque, this important city when it comes to UFOs. We never had a big UFO conference, and it's about time. Next year, Albuquerque
A lot of heavy
Alien
hitters
Explorations Conference.
including, here's Truth.
And I'll be there.
Okay.
You're welcome. You're welcome. And I'll stay around for, if you want to take a picture or whatever. Yeah.
Thank you, Rick. Sorry for my.
No problem.
I have a personal interest in.
I'll move
My
this.
dad works for gas and he ran the warehouse in the building in Lozano in the late 40s. And I said my grandson, a few years ago, construction job, deep underground, and saw that huge.
But yeah, there are.
Anyway,
talk about
no, I know, yeah.
Pictures.
I appreciate all your.
Sure. Yeah.
What's her real name?
You're sticking around like sticking around.
It's so nice to meet
Maureen,
you.
you're sticking around, right?
I love your interviews.
Chat real quick.
Wow.
That's how I found out.
I'm going next week. We're going to
I've learned so much. Thank you. I have a question though.
Yes.
I love the Kitty Smith story. That's the first interview I saw. Do you know if there's more people like her than there are today?
Many, many, many more. Many, many more.
Wow, John Strader from the UFO Hotspot. You heard it here live. I'm going to start packing up my gear. I want to thank you all for listening, and please share this when it's finished far and wide. I will post some pictures and a little bit of stuff from the background as this has been happening. What a great time here in Albuquerque, New Mexico at the Cherry Hills Library, and we have a great crowd here, as you can see. Very well informed. They had incredible questions for Mr. Doty. I'm sorry that I can't open it up to you all online because there's just too difficult to do that right here. And Mr. Doty has a whole line of people who are trying to get close to the master. And I just want to thank you all for listening. And there'll be much more this type of space coming from the UFO Hotspot. I'm John Strader signing out. Thank you all for listening. Check you later.